Good day. Welcome to Strong Ambition Podcast. And we're going to dive into yo-yo dieting and the mindset that you need if you're going to go into a fat loss journey. Plus, can you be healthy at any size with Callie Coshun? Callie is an online trainer herself and has been through quite a fat loss journey, has some great insight to give other people going through their own fat loss journey. Plus, we talk about a very important topic around, can you be healthy at any size? And this is a very highly debated and a very controversial topic, but she has some great insight related to her own family on this idea. So I'll let her tell her story in great more detail as well. So without further ado, here is Callie Coshun. Good day, Callie. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. You're another mentorship member, so we're fellow colleagues in the same mentorship, and super excited to be able to get to know you better because this is the first time we're meeting. And I love to just know the person. I don't do too much of an intro. I want the person to tell their story. So how about we dive into that? Tell people who you are and how you got to be doing what you're doing now.
All right, awesome. So my name is Callie. I am originally from Wisconsin. Recently moved to Southern California. I'm living in San Diego right now. I am fairly new to personal training, but I started my fitness journey about 10 years ago, personally. I was in a huge slump in my life, and fitness kind of came to me from there. Growing up, played sports. I was never really an athlete, but I did what I needed to do to get through the day. I was an active kid outside playing, but when I went to college, everything kind of spiraled. You know, you're on your own, your food choices are your own, and just lost my way. And in my mid-20s, kind of came back to fitness and being a little bit more active, mostly to lose weight, and turned into just a crazy journey.
Yeah, that's really good. I love hearing that. That's usually where it comes from. It's like getting into this fitness industry is from, going through your own journey. I'm curious. I'd like to come back to that, initial influence there of being in your youth, because that was quite similar, where, when you start to get into the realm of making your own choices, and we don't make great ones when we're kids, right? As soon as my parents weren't watching me and how many, pops and bags of chips I was sneaking away, things kind of got out of hand. I'm actually quite surprised I didn't end up as a bit of a diabetic when I was a kid, probably pretty close. But for yourself, why don't you dive into a little bit more of that detail? Because I think it's really interesting. What were kind of influence you did or didn't have as far as when you were growing up when it came to like nutrition and training?
I guess training was not really a thing outside of playing sports. Nutrition wise, I grew up in a house, diet culture was a huge part of growing up. My mom grew up in the 80s, so she went through all of that diet culture, Atkins diet. How many different fad diets came out of the 80s? And then from there, kind of passed down some of those issues into all the 90s fad diets that came out when I was growing up. Nutrition was not really talked about. We ate decently healthy, but there's definitely like trips through the drive-through McDonald's and all of that stuff, Taco Bell. And so it was never talked about in my house. So then I think that's why when I went away, I was like, I can literally just eat whatever I want. Growing up, yeah, you see all of those ups and downs. My mom was one who gained weight, lost weight, in whatever fad diet she could be in. So watching that growing up, you get influenced by it. I guess that's probably most of my childhood was when it comes to nutrition and fitness. That's what I saw. We grew up, cardio was the only way to lose weight, and nutrition wasn't as big of a part of it.
Big thing there, is we just didn't know what we didn't know, and the influences cardio and just calorie restriction is all people really thought of. So Would you imagine then that at this point you were developing some poor relationships with food? Did you do any diet cycles yourself? I know I
Oh,
did when I was younger.
absolutely.
Yeah. So what was that like when you're growing up, going through some different diet cycles?
Yeah. I mean, I've bounced back and forth between, I mean, up to over 200 pounds down to 130 pounds, back and forth multiple times. Um, I was in high school. I feel like there's always that thing where you're like, oh, I wish I was as skinny as the first time I thought I was fat. There's that. I probably weighed maybe 150, 160 and wasn't working out, anything like that. So it was that like skinny fat kind of thing. But I asked my parents if I could do Nutrisystem. I don't know if you are familiar with Nutrisystem
I think so.
at all. They essentially like send you food. It's like lean cuisine type meals, microwavable stuff. And then you add like a salad and you can add other things to your meals, but they give you a diet plan. And I lost probably 30 pounds in a summer doing that, which was what I was looking for. So great. There's no exit plan in things like those. There is an exit plan, but they make you keep buying the meals and keep paying for it. So there's no way to be in the real world. That's probably the first time I did one of those like crash diets to lose a bunch of weight. So I was probably 16 when I did that. Then in college, gained the freshman 15, probably more than 15 pounds, honestly, and did Nutrisystem again because it worked the first time to lose the weight. And I did it again. I don't know why I was allowed at 16 really to do that, but my parents, bless them, they don't know. They didn't know any different, and it worked. So after that, I've tried every diet. I've done Whole30. I've done Atkins, cutting out as many carbs as I can. I've done, I mean, name it. I've probably tried it. I did the Special K diet. Do you remember the Special K? So Special
No.
K cereal. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Special K cereal came out with a diet plan, which meant you had to buy Special K products. You ate Special K products for 2 meals, and then your third meal could be whatever you wanted, essentially. So you'd have like breakfast bars, granola bars, whatever, but they were made of Special K. And then you could have a bowl of cereal for lunch and like one fruit, one vegetable. Like there was probably more to it than that. But I tried that. I lasted maybe 3 days. But that's what I mean when I've tried every diet. I've gone
Yeah.
that far into it.
I never heard of that one.
It's wild.
That's awesome. I actually am a fan of how they taste. Their cereal tasted pretty good, but
that's why I was bought in because I ate it already. So I was like, I could do this.
Yeah. No, they sell themselves pretty well. They put the figures on the covers. The ones can be like the, dried cereal, vanilla cakes, special almond. Like that one just tasted good. And you think that you're not eating a lot, but no, that's a lot of different diets, and that does a lot of mental toll on a person. So when did you feel like you started to pivot into a better direction?
Yeah, so after college, I moved to California the first time. I was broke, gained a bunch of weight because I was eating just crap food that was cheap. Moved back to Wisconsin after that. And I was, like I said, I was just in a total depression. I started going to Zumba classes with my mom and just fell in love with Zumba. And I was going to probably 4 or 5 classes a week and just started moving my body. And all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm moving my body, not sitting on the couch. I'm losing a little bit of weight. And from there, when you're moving your body, realizing that, you start just kind of snowballing into making better choices with food. I actually did the Whole30 for the first time around that time too. And despite some of my issues with the Whole30 diet, it taught me better food choices because you're cutting out so many things that you are forced to eat, things like turkey burgers and just vegetables and fruit and all of it that I wasn't necessarily eating a ton of before that. So while I can harp on the Whole30 and all the restrictions, it did teach me a lot. So that was probably about 9 years ago at this point that I started really pivoting into that like cleaner eating. I still fall back into some of those habits, but moving my body and making those better choices led me kind of just into this snowball of finding training, weightlifting, and all of that along the way.
Really cool that you had that shift and finally kind of seeing the right food choices. And this is the one thing that I don't think gets talked enough about with the yo-yo dieting is, yeah, people go into all these fad diets, they try things and they fails and it goes up and down, but there's a learning process still, right? With any diet plan that I've tried, it's like, oh, well, I kind of did like this part, I did like this. And it's similar to trying a different training program. You try someone's training program, try someone else's. The difference is nutrition is when you go off of the nutrition program, people tend to go really off the rails and it goes really poor the other direction. But if you go off a training program, you're probably still training and it doesn't have such a catastrophic far in the opposite way. But when you went through the Whole30, I think that's a really cool part of the story that, you know, I did keto and I mostly did keto for the sake of trying it with my client. I wasn't really trying to do it as much, but I learned something from it. I did carnivore because I want to learn from it. It's like, what does this diet have to offer? And I think that's really important for people to appreciate that a form of restriction doesn't have to be terrifying, but it's to what extent. And so I've done whole food challenges with clients, but I don't call it the perfect Whole30. Like I just say, hey, how whole food can you do? How much whole food can you have? And then we talk about, well, what about this? What about this? It's like, are you going to eat too much of it? Like if it's cheese and you're going to have too much of it, it's like, well, then let's maybe just not have the cheese for a bit so we don't want to overconsume it. If someone's, and I've heard someone say, oh, hummus doesn't belong in the whole food diet. I'm like, really? Is hummus going to be where I'm going to have too many calories? I don't think so. And so when we start to look at the context and people who have done the challenge with me have been like, what about this? I was like, if it's not a high risk food, I'm not really worried about it. And it teaches you to have satiety. And I've had clients go through it before. And one client in particular who loves bread, honestly started to say, you know, I will only have bread for enjoyment. But if I want nourishment for my food, I don't think it's useful. And it's like, that's what I want you to discover. So I think that's really good that you highlighted that, hey, this is actually where I started to make my pivot and I started to learn more things. I'm curious where else you found some other good influences on nutrition and training as you were going through there, because you came from the Whole30 and things started to get better, you know, probably prioritizing protein and stuff like that. Who were some of your other big influences that helped you?
I would probably say just I surrounded myself with the fitness community in general. I also listened to a lot of podcasts. I worked a job that was a desk job, so I could have my headphones in most of the day, and that's where I found most of my podcasts. I think it really comes down to who you're surrounding yourself with and learning from, and you know, you hear some of the bad stuff too on the diet side, but getting to again learn from those things and from other people's experiences because you're watching them make those mistakes. And I learned a lot of it just myself, figuring it out and what felt good to me nutrition wise, just getting creative. And I think then finding the mentorship was another big thing. Jordan Syatt was a huge part of my journey at a certain point because he does not demonize food. He is very outspoken about being able to have quote unquote bad foods in some sort of moderation. And that's a big thing for me. If I obviously have learned that if I cut big food groups out, I'm going to fall right back into that trap the moment that I can eat those foods again. So if I want to have a slice of pizza, I can have a slice of pizza, but I'm going to make sure that I'm getting my veggies in the rest of the day or whatever that is. So I think just finding that group of people that you can learn from.
Absolutely. I think that's so big. I love that you mentioned both the good and bad of podcasting, because that's where I found a ton of information myself, or at least it allows you to beg the question of where you can find information, right? Because sometimes it's often just surface level. Like that's what this conversation is. It's surface level things for people to appreciate, and then you try to go down rabbit holes of hearing other people in the same context, and that's where I've learned a lot myself as well. And the most important lesson is the one that you had said. It's what works for you, because that's what people have to be willing to do and try things out. So from your own perspective, what did your journey look like as far as, you know, whether it be fitness, body composition changes? Because you said you yo-yoed a fair bit up and down in weight, and kind of where did you find yourself after a certain point in time?
Yeah, so I've been most recently I had dropped a bunch of weight, and that was when I found weightlifting after. So I was probably at my skinniest and then started gaining weight back because I was building muscle. I have kind of been pretty steady the last 3 to 4 years at this weight, which through COVID is wild that I maintained my weight. I um, I think a lot of it had to do with like finding those influences in the last few years. I took a lot of time to myself and during that COVID time to make sure that I was treating my body right. I I'm not really sure that I'm 100% good with my choices all the time, but I don't think anyone ever is.
Yeah.
No perfect.
So,
I'm not going to say that I've completely healed my relationship with food, but I am definitely in a much better place, and the yo-yoing has stopped, which is great.
yeah, that's huge. That alone is, especially when you came from trying so many diets, from being a kid who's watching their parents do it. And I didn't know my parents do it, but my mom was always health conscious and my sisters were health conscious. And so we're always watching these things. I remember we were doing fitness tapes. Very first fitness tapes, I think I was doing an ab one when I was in grade 6. It's like a kid in grade 6 shouldn't worry about his abs.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, at the same time, then you start to really ask yourself these questions around food, but you get so much comfort from it. And to be able to get to that point where you're like, hey, you know what? I don't feel like I have to yo-yo and weight, and I feel like I have a lifestyle. But even for myself, I'll totally agree that my journey isn't done. It's just some of the big shifts that we changed in the past. And that sounds like you're in a much better place. And I like you being open to that. I think that's the one thing I don't like hearing from people is like, I figured it out. I'm pretty sure we got this figured out. It's like, well, probably not. You might have figured some stuff out, but I mean, I don't think it's all done, and it's just not exciting if it's all done. There's a journey to be had, and I know for myself, I've evolved my diet every single year from just adding a few more things that make it better, and it's just no different than becoming a better personal trainer. I add more things to how I train myself and how I train my clients, to the point where, and I've heard Jordan say this before, you make a program for a client like 6 months ago, and you look back at that program and you look at this now and you're like, oh man, that was fucking stupid. And you're constantly evolving. So I think that's a good perspective to take. Now, what would you say is kind of been some of your more recent challenges? And I think it's helpful for anyone to hear, whether especially females and you know, anyone else in their journey, because that's what I think people underestimate, that trainers struggle too. Trainers struggle with their weight, trainers struggle with their training, but we just try to get as good as we can at it. So what would you say is currently some of the things, especially let's start with exercise. What are your biggest challenges that you're trying to overcome when it comes to exercise?
Yeah, so I moved in November, right after Thanksgiving. I moved to across the country. So I moved from Wisconsin. I stayed with my sister in Arizona for about 3 months, and I had no gym. I had like limited food options living with them. I actually did not lift a single weight in the 3 months that I lived there. So now, about a month ago, I moved from Phoenix to San Diego, where I am now. And I am just slowly getting back into lifting. So I have to right now give myself a little bit of grace for that time that I was not able to lift. I used that time to hang out with my nephews, hang out with my sister, and be able to just kind of live in the moment. And as much as I would have loved to have been in the gym, I wasn't. So I'm giving myself grace, and I'm kind of feel like I'm starting over, even though I'm not. I know what I'm doing now. So as exercise, I'm easing myself back in to a very basic program. And it's a program that I put a lot of my brand new clients through, because it's the one that works, the very basic lifts, and just trying to figure out how to get back to where I was.
That's great. I think that's awesome that you really come back to giving myself grace. Like, I'm giving myself a break, and you got it. Like, something that people really get too caught up in, and especially some clients that want to work really hard. I'm like, oh, I feel guilty. I feel guilty. I'm so guilty about this. And it's like, I really believe that it's okay to have guilt. I think that it's a tool. And I always tell people, it's like, use it as an indication that you had an action, that you did something not in line with your values, but you had a moment of some sort of mistake, and use that as that signal. But living in guilt is different than listening to guilt. And so, I'll use myself an example. As last weekend, I was just at an Easter dinner, and my goodness, I went after this cheesecake that my sister made, and had a good serving size of everything, and had a few extra mini eggs, plus she had some graham cracker crumble crust, and I just kept going after it. Did I eat too much? Probably. Did I feel like I ate too much? Did I have a guilty feeling? Yes, a little bit. But it's not that like I'm going to live in that guilt the whole week. It's okay, I have a feeling that I did something I shouldn't have. Okay, now let's actually forgive ourselves. And that grace is super important, because now if I say, okay, the person that I was made a decision at that time, I'm now officially a different person because I've lived through it. And if you live through it, you can look back at it with a form of forgiveness for yourself, that grace, and say, well, what can I do better next time? Next time I don't have to go back for 3 extra servings of just the graham cracker crust and a bunch of different extra mini eggs. Could have walked away from that, right? And I think that's helpful for people, because they need to understand that, you need to give yourself grace. You've given yourself grace for exercise. You got to have that, right? That mindset.
Yeah, I think the mental health aspect is so important when it comes to all of that, because like it just spirals. If you keep feeling guilty, you're eventually going to be like, well, if I just don't ever go back to exercising, I'm never going to feel guilty if I miss like a workout again. So I've been in that spiral before, and it's not worth it to waste the mental capacity to do that.
That's a good way to put it. It's not worth it to waste the mental capacity, because it's not going to help you to make yourself, debilitated, guilty. Like, guilt is, again, a signal of something you learn from, but it's nowhere to live. So I really value that. Now, what would you say in terms of nutrition has been some of your biggest kind of challenges, or something that you're working towards yourself personally right now?
Yeah, so kind of along the same thing with moving, everything was kind of in limbo. So I was, made probably not as good of choices. And now that I'm a little bit more settled here in San Diego, I can get back to a routine. I need routine. I crave routine. So for me, I need to eat breakfast at a certain time, or I eat almost the exact same foods for breakfast specifically, because that sets up kind of your whole day. So instead of grabbing a quick granola bar, which I have to sometimes, or not eating until 11 sometimes when I'm not in my routine. So just kind of working back towards that routine, and just being able to get groceries. I was living in with a mini fridge instead of a full fridge, so I didn't have as many options. Being able to buy fresh foods again will be good.
Oh, you really brought me back to my old days of living with some friends and living off of a mini fridge. That's because you just don't got the real estate, right? And you want to prep food, you want to have it. We shared a fridge upstairs, and I just went and bought a mini fridge, so I had enough food prepped for the week, so I could actually store stuff. And that's what you got to do sometimes. You're just trying to make it the best you can. So
Yeah.
I think that's really cool that you're making that big life change and still again being patient with yourself throughout it. When you look back at your evolution and kind of where you come, I'd be curious to know, what do you encourage people to appreciate of, fat loss journeys and trying to transform their life? What were some of the biggest moments that you really found that you kind of wish you knew sooner?
I think probably that mental health aspect of it, with the guilt and not letting it spiral. I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned. And it took a lot of trial and error with all the diets, all the different exercise plans I've tried. I think that's probably the thing I wish I had figured out sooner. And I mean, I don't think I could have ever figured that out sooner. I think I had to go through everything I went through for that to work.
Right. And so what frame do you give for advice in that? Because it's important to pay attention to the mental health. So what would you tell an individual, they're trying to lose their first 20 or 40 pounds of weight and they don't know anything and they're really excited to, but how do you prepare them for that?
Yeah. Patience is the biggest key to all of it. If the weight's falling off too fast, it's probably not the right way to be losing the weight unless you have hundreds of pounds to lose. Work on sustainability from day one. Don't lose a bunch of weight and then decide, okay, now I got to figure out how I'm going to fit this into my everyday life. Start from day one, figuring out what changes you're making are going to fit in forever. It's a forever thing. It's not once I get to X amount of pounds, I can just go right back to what I was doing. You have to work on that from day one.
Very true. And it's so hard for people to appreciate that when they, haven't lost the weight and they hear us saying, sustainability. Every coach says it, or most coaches will say it. It's like sustainability. You got to have it sustainable. And it's almost like a boring answer, but it's true. It's like, but that's why we say it, is because so many people will yo-yo in weight. 9 out of 10 people gain the weight back. And that's why it's so valuable. But what would you say some people are missing? And it could be anything. It'd be a few tips. It could be something like, there's just something about their diet setup or their training, like something that wouldn't occur to them, wouldn't be as intuitive to them, but you wish more people knew.
That's such a hard question. Wish people knew. I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. Can I think about it for
yeah. No, and I mean, and I'll kind of give you my answer and perspective of this. It might help you a little bit because these overarching themes can be so obvious for people that they don't pay attention to. Like when we say, oh, you got to have sustainability. And then they say, yeah, okay, I want sustainability. But then they don't do anything because they're almost afraid of doing anything. And they think that everything's unsustainable, or it just doesn't give them like hard tools. Now, the simplest one to me is like anyone who's not on a good diet plan isn't eating enough protein, which is relatively obvious, but they really don't know how much protein they can eat. And so I feel like that's like one of the things that, like, I'm just saying this speculatively, and I don't know for sure, but I could predict that if all the population that was unhealthy doubled their protein intake, right? Now I'm a bit biased, I say from meat, but if you just double the protein intake, but ideally from meat, you would immediately improve all of their body compositions over the course of the next 2 months. And it's extremely likely that you would have a high improvement in all body composition. I didn't say you solve everything, but everyone would actually for sure have a higher metabolic rate, and everyone would for sure would have higher satiety signals and would take care of most of their calories naturally. And then they would also, improve recovery and all these other things. So if that one piece was taken care of, and unfortunately with the nutrition guides still being so archaic that they're afraid to encourage a lot of protein. But that's one thing that whenever I start with people, it's like, you got to eat more. But what's some other like, and you can use that example, but any of the other ones that are like kind of practical tools that when you work with a client, like this is a tool we got to work on because you're just missing it.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that, with the protein. In my own personal experience, doing the Whole30, you're essentially only able to eat like meat, fruits, and veggies. So I was all of a sudden eating a lot more protein and being like, oh, why are these muscles popping up? Like, oh, because my body couldn't build muscle because I didn't have enough protein. I think the other biggest thing is just movement and like the non-exercise movement throughout your day is a huge piece of the puzzle that people aren't getting. And I know that that is hard for people who work desk jobs. I worked desk jobs for most of my career so far. I That's what kind of started me off, was going to those Zumba classes. So if you can't get up and walk a mile at lunch or whatever, find something to get those steps in during your day or at the end of your day or whatever it is, because that's where majority of your metabolism and burning your calories is going to come from, is those that non-exercise stuff. And I know Zumba is considered exercise, but whatever you got to do to get your steps in, go for a walk, take a lap around the office. I used to do that. I would take the long way around to the bathroom every time I had to go. Whatever you got to do to just move your body, I think that would be probably a huge piece of the puzzle.
I love that point. That is honestly was going to be my second point, was I wish more people just knew what broke down metabolism. It's like, I want people to know protein. I want them to understand metabolism, because if you have the right amount of protein, you understand metabolism is a thing, but it is modestly controllable, and you don't have to blame your metabolism for anything because you are your metabolism, right? It's mostly going to be your body weight, size, and gender. And then it's going to be how much you walk in a day. The training itself is pretty negligible because the body's going to average it out. And then your non-exercise activity is going to be way more impactful. So you might have someone that, yeah, I train 4 or 5 days a week. How many steps do you get? About 4,000 a day. It's like, you actually got a bad metabolism because you're not moving enough. And it was my old mentor that had said, it's 23 hours out of the day, because the 1 hour you're exercising is one thing, but it's the rest of the day that matters. And what's really fun about NEAT is that it can fit into your life. When I had done my last bodybuilding prep last year, for the first 3 months, I did 0 cardio, and I did all my cardio at the end, but I did 12 to 14K steps a day. I eventually was doing 14K steps a day. I never sweat. I had lost 30 pounds. Now, it was a very consistent, I wouldn't say crazy restrictive, but very consistent dieting, and not easy for everyone. And not everyone can do 14K steps in a day, but I literally didn't sweat for the first 3 months of a fat loss challenge, of a bodybuilding challenge, which I did very well on. And I lost 30 pounds. And so it's like, it's not even a matter of sweating, right? It's like, you could literally not sweat. But I love that you highlighted the point too of Zumba, and like that you loved it so much. I think that's more of what people need to understand. Like, there is a requirement for, I think, a requirement of strength training, but the most important thing is just movement that you enjoy. And Absolutely. So tell me about that evolution. What is it about Zumba that you love so much that got you into it? And tell people, like, what is Zumba? Like, what makes it what it is?
Yeah, so should I give you my instructor spiel of what?
Yeah.
So Zumba is a Latin-based dance fitness class. So it's Latin-based, but we dance to all different world rhythms. So we do some Bhangra, Bollywood, Afro beats, all of that stuff. It's essentially an hour class dance party, which, I mean, just doesn't get better than that. You are moving the entire time. I have always loved music my entire life. We would, on the days we're cleaning the house when I was a kid, it was always music on in the background. So I have danced my entire life, not in any kind of professional way. I've never taken a dance class in my life until Zumba, but it's a dance party, and it is for anyone and everyone that wants to do it. I have had students who are like going left when we're going right. I don't care. It's the same number of steps each way. you're still moving your body. If you can't do a move or something hurts, I tell everyone to just march in place, do something, step, touch, it doesn't matter. I fell in love with Zumba mostly because of the people that I found. I had taken Zumba classes before in my life. I think it hit me at the right time, right place, but I found a group of people who just loved it. And there's nothing better than the energy in a room during a Zumba class. I mean, it's almost cult-like sometimes how people love Zumba classes. Everyone's in bright colors. We wear neon everything. They have the shirts that you can buy online so everyone's matching. And did you get the new line? And I think just the community aspect of it with students and with instructors. I literally took one class and went home and researched how to become an instructor because of the group that I met that first day. The next week I went back to class, and on the drive home, my mom turns to me and she goes, "I think you could be an instructor." And I was like, "Mom, I already looked into it." So I was hooked from the moment I stepped into that class because just the community around it. And then, like I said, I was going to 4 or 5 classes a week after that.
Yeah. The really cool thing about the Zumba, all fitness can have an element of community if you create it, right? Boot camps have this. CrossFit massively did create an actual cult, and you can get it in powerlifting. I remember when I was in a strength training gym, it felt like they had a community there, and you always can get that community aspect, which actually makes it really good for people adhering to the program. It's one of the most helpful things for adherence. My boxing club was like that. But the really cool thing, and it kind of reminds me of sparring for boxers, because sparring is so intense, but you shared that moment. And when you're doing the Zumba class, and boot camps are very similar to this, you share that moment, but dance is a little bit more to the soul. Like, and I'm just saying this speculatively because I haven't done it, but like when you share that energy and that rhythm and everything else, and everyone's feeling it at the same time, that's a pretty special thing. And I think that's in general why all the group fitness classes work. When you have the pump class, you have a spin class. Like, how big did spin get in the last 5 years? Massive. And you're just spinning, but you're spinning to music, and people create this intensity, and you have all these people doing it with you, and they're all working really hard. And it's like, you get to share that battle. I used to run a boot camp called TTF, and our mantra was share the pain, share the gain. And that was definitely the whole culture that you got from people sharing it together. And like I say, that I think the music aspect really makes that pretty unique. So currently, are you still doing a lot of Zumba yourself? And when did you start to evolve into adding strength training to your repertoire?
So I do still teach one Zumba class here in San Diego. Prior to moving, I was teaching 3 classes a week. I would love to teach more. I love doing it. It is hard on your body to teach 5 to 10 classes a week, but I would love to do it if I could. So I taught Zumba for about a year, and then they have another program. It's created by Zumba, but it's a HIIT class, and it's called Strong Nation. It's martial arts, kickboxing, all body weight, set to music. So that's where the Zumba kind of comes in. And they actually create the movement and then create the music. So they have a basic music, they create the movement, so then they backwards engineer the music to fit the movement. So every time you throw a punch, it hits a beat. So it's very self-motivating. And it also, you don't have to count. I mean, like, there are counts, but it's like a song. So it's 3 parts and they repeat. So you know what's coming next. The more you do it, it's very, very motivating. I fell in love with teaching that class. That was, again, about the time I started eating more protein. So I was like, oh, I'm like doing push-ups and I'm doing all this stuff and I'm building muscle. And that kind of spiraled into like, well, if I could be building muscle, doing all these body weight things, what can I do if I start adding strength training to it? And they actually offered a discount on the personal training certification through Strong Nation. It was during the pandemic. They were trying to get instructors who were out of a job to get other forms of income. So they were like, you guys already love teaching fitness classes. Here's a discount code. I think I got like half off of the NASM certified personal training certification, which it's pretty expensive. So I was like, great, I got nothing else going on. I'll do that. Even though I was working a full-time job still, I just went and got my certification to help my students kind of the same way that I was learning things. I wanted to give them another option to be able to add to their repertoire. Because if they loved working out with me in these group classes, it's gonna translate over to that one-on-one also.
Absolutely. That's really cool how it evolved. And that's a really unique way of doing training. But that reminds me of like the pump classes. My sister had told me about it, and I'd done it with my clients before. It was a lot of fun. One of my clients really enjoyed it. And we had done like all classic rock like exercises. So it was like do this one exercise to AC/DC and to the beat to AC/DC, and then chose another one. And the engagement, like you say, you don't have to count reps. You're just going through the motions, and you can keep the challenge going. So I think that's really cool that that's how it engaged you. So do you currently do more of that style of strength training, or do you have more structured traditional strength training still in your repertoire?
I do the traditional strength training also. Yeah. So I teach those classes, but my own fitness, I mean, obviously I'm getting a workout while I'm teaching those a little bit, but my workout is completely separate from that. I try at least 3 times a week, sometimes 4 if I can fit in a 4th workout with traditional strength training. I fell in love with deadlifting, with squats, like the very basic lifts. Once I started doing it, it's so empowering. I grew up when women weren't lifting. We lifted 5-pound dumbbells, and that was about it. Like if I could do an 8, that was, like I wasn't trying to up my weights ever. And I didn't understand like just the traditional lifts. I would go to the gym and just do like a million bicep curls because I knew how to do that without breaking my form. So I would walk on the treadmill for a half hour and then do some like abs and some bicep curls because that's what I knew how to do. So now I definitely do a lot more traditional lifting, well-rounded lifting.
That's great. And I really love that you pointed that out. I always have this joke about the people who come into the hotel gym that I train people at, and some of my clients be like, oh, are they going to use the equipment? I'm like, no, they're going to do cardio for about 10 to 20 minutes. They will pick up a weight and maybe do curls, and then maybe do some core. And I called it out, and a female had done just that. And I'm curious from your lens too, you mentioned this, and do you think it was because of the assumptions that individuals make, not knowing? And do you think it's only because you think that, the bicep curls are easier, safer, and the core because people want to spot reduce? Like what do you think goes through people's thought process when they make that mistake?
I think the core thing, definitely. I think the spot reducing. I think a lot of it is just lack of knowledge too. I think people now you can go on TikTok, you can go on Instagram and see a million different lifts. But growing up, I don't think I was ever shown how to do anything but those very like a bench press, which I never had the upper body strength to even lift the bar when I was like in high school. So because I was just doing bicep curls all day, I think it's just lack of knowledge. Like now we can see it everywhere, but back when I was growing up, that was never something you saw. That was like for the boys. That wasn't for me. That was for the football players to do. So I think especially for women, it's just lack of knowledge. We're taught to do a million crunches, and that will make us skinny.
Yeah, I think it definitely see it in some older gentlemen as well. I don't see as much in younger gentlemen, but older gentlemen, or just, and when people are overweight, they'll make the concept of doing cardio and crunches and thinking that that's going to help them. But I love that you pointed that out, that, it's just this misconception that females make. What other messages do you think you have for helping females try to feel more empowered when it comes to fitness and nutrition?
I think just not everything in life is about being skinny. It truly isn't. No one else cares if you're not the fittest, skinniest person. It's all in your head, and it's what's been fed to us our entire lives. It's great to be in shape and healthy, but I think healthy is different for everyone. If it is going to jeopardize your mental health to be so skinny, that's also not good for you. So I think just we need to stop wrapping ourselves around this idea and this concept that every single thing we do has to make us smaller. Because being smaller isn't everything. And I think when you're putting it in your brain that you need to be physically small, it eventually is going to force you to be a smaller mental person also. Like you're losing confidence. You think losing that 30 pounds is going to fix your entire life, and it's not, because I've been back and forth a million times. So just let go of that is probably the biggest thing I would say to women.
That's really well stated. Like, it makes you feel like a small person if you only want to be small. And small confidence, small, thinking of yourself needing to be small makes you feel not good enough, right? And I think that's super valuable, that people can find a better form of self-value. And you mentioned that's one of the most important things in the health journey. Now, this is a very important topic too. I'm glad we got on this, because it's something I think needs to be discussed more around the HAES movement, healthy at any size. And now I have a biased opinion, but I do believe that there is a spectrum of fitness that we don't need to just look at. We shouldn't be looking at really skinny people. And I think we're moving past that, but we're still looking at the fitness people as being, the epitome of fitness, and they're not. Like the people who are like the fitness influencers who are jacked and lean and shredded are either on substance or genetically gifted. So they're not even great advice for most people. But then when we go as far, and again, this is where I'm biased, you may or may not agree. Like, you see people on the HAES movement that I think go too far the other direction and don't always represent health. But I do believe that there is a spectrum of health. And so I'd be curious your perspective on this, on the HAES movement itself, and what should people consider?
Yeah. I struggle with this one a lot. I go back and forth a lot, because there is obviously, like, obesity is such a horrible topic to talk about, because everyone gets up in arms about it. It is not more mental, but there is a mental aspect to it that no one truly understands. And I think it's coming, a lot of it is being talked about with now Ozempic and all of that stuff coming out, and they should just work harder and whatever. It's bullshit that people aren't, it is a disease. And I think I have a hard time because of so much bias in the world and how people treat fat people, that I am absolutely happy with if they want to be the way that they are. Mental health is, I talk about it all the time because it's so important. And if their mental health is bad because they're losing the weight, it's just as bad as being physically unhealthy. And genetics are a huge part of it that we take out. Genetics cannot be influenced completely. So I don't know. I really have a hard time going back and forth about this one, because there are people that are fat that move more than people who are skinny. And you have bodybuilders who are they walk their steps, but they're not doing actual zone 2 cardio, and they're in the best shape supposedly. And so it is this huge spectrum. I stumble over my words because I know that this is such a huge topic. And do I think that obesity is a problem? Yes. And do I think that there are obese people who are extremely unhealthy? Yes. But I also think that there are people who are fat who are not unhealthy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think that they are just the fact that they're being treated so differently as human beings, and they aren't treated as human beings sometimes, is so disgusting that if they want that movement and it makes them feel good to be part of that and it helps them even 1%, go for it.
Yeah. Well, I love that you said about how they feel, like their mental health. So I've said this for many years. HAES should stand for happy at any size. I don't think you want to use the word healthy at any size without some context, because as you just said, a bodybuilder cannot be healthy. There's been a lot of bodybuilders that have died recently, and they have extremely great physiques from our common concept of what a good fit person is. And so that doesn't make it healthy, because health is what? Well, it's likely not dying. But I would even, as you look at more of the World Health Organization definition of healthy, it includes the mental health piece. And so happy at any size, it was actually ironically watching an episode of Dr. House, and this guy who was super obese, like he was just morbidly obese, super overweight. And they were trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And they immediately wanted to blame his weight because he was so overweight. And he's like, you know what? I know I have my issues, but I just love food, and I want to live my life this way. And I just thought there was something beautiful about that. I'm like, that is not me, but that's like, hey, you're owning it. And I think that's fine. But I don't think it's great to pretend that there aren't health markers that we can look at. And to me, it's just like, it's physical capacity. And, you know, if you're physically trying to, like you mentioned, do zone 2 cardio, try and do strength training, and on a normal concept of what the average population would look at is quote unquote obese. Like I'm obese on using that scale. But if we have, right. And so if we have this understanding that that scale is only useful, honestly, for people who aren't trying. Like that's the only way to put it. Like if you're not trying to work out, have some cardiovascular work, and trying to eat, you know, have some nutrition, then obesity or using the obese scale of the BMI has some concept. But the context of really being healthy, we have to take into consideration, well, how fit are they from a physical standpoint? Like, are they trying to do push-ups? Are they trying to deadlift their body weight? I'd be more interested in seeing, you know, some sort of correlation towards deadlifting weight. You know, if we could put that into consideration with your actual weight, and that has far more of probably, I would even argue, a mortality curve, right? And you look at just steps, like these other things that are super important. So
yeah, I think it's also important to look at or to think about, you're looking at a person, you don't know where they came from. They could still be 300 pounds, but what if a few years ago they were 400 or 500 pounds? Yeah. Like you're looking at this person and you're like, oh, they're not trying very hard. They're not taking amount of weight. They're just not what you consider the ideal. We don't know everything about anyone. So to not judge that or question it, like you just can't know anyone's backstory. I also personally, over the last 2 years, I have lost 4 close family members. It was actually in the span of a year. 3 of them were from health issues. One of them was probably, like, he probably ate the healthiest that I know. He loved to cook. He was very, like, he watched Food Network all the time. Like he's the one that introduced me to Iron Chef. And he was sick, but he ended up passing away. Then I have an aunt who was a former alcoholic who also passed away, not from that, but probably some long-term issues from that. And then another one who was not the healthiest and overweight and passed away. The 3 of them, all very different issues, passed away from cardiovascular issues that are genetic in my family, on that side of the family. So after that happened, my mom has 9 brothers and sisters. There's 10 of them total. That was 3 siblings in a year that my mom lost. after that, all of the remaining siblings had kind of an oh shit moment and went and had all their physicals done, had everything done that they could, because they're like, what is going on? How do we prevent this from happening to the rest of us?
Mm-hmm.
After that, my uncle, who is a runner, he probably runs 5 miles a day. He is, again, like one of the healthiest people, from an outside perspective. Going through these physicals, he found that he had a blockage in his heart and had to have a stent put in.
Wow.
So of all the siblings, all 10 of them, he is probably the healthiest, and he's the one that they found an issue with. So you can't know what is healthy ever. Right. So I think it's so hard to even I think you can be healthy at every size, because for me, I saw healthy people get very sick and a few of them die in a year. So that just a personal perspective on that too.
It's a great story, and I'm sorry for all your losses, but it's super interesting to hear that. I've heard this a few times where you have these kind of unique stories where people are just, always running and really trying to be fit. And I don't know this 100%, but my understanding is there is a problematic thing with running at a high frequency. Like daily running, I don't think is really healthy for the heart. And like some of these ultra marathons and all that, like bodybuilding isn't healthy too. And I bodybuild, like powerlifting isn't healthy at far end of the spectrum. But this is one of those contexts where people think, oh, you're running all the time. They're probably live forever. It's like, actually, you're taxing your heart a lot. So everything has context where it can be taken to an unhealthy extent. Mm-hmm. And what people don't realize is quite commonly, like, just the modest amount of everything is the healthiest thing you can have. Having some body fat on you is good for energy reserves, if you think even just evolutionarily. So
especially as a woman, when it comes to like our menstrual cycle and all of that stuff, like having that's why like women's body fat percentage is always a little bit higher in all of those scales than men's should be.
Yeah,
it's healthy for us to have a little bit of extra fat on us.
Yeah, and I would just even argue for a lot of people, you'll notice a lot of people there can be these genetic people who naturally would be lean, naturally not have an appetite, and naturally probably have higher needs, just all coming from their genetics. Mm-hmm. But if that hasn't been the way you want to live your life, the sentiment you said before, I just got to highlight again. It's not worth your health if you're not happy there, because then it's not even healthy. It's not where you want to live your life. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I think a lot of people and a lot of women should really take into consideration. I'm glad you raised that point, because it's so hard and you don't know everyone's story. I had a client that is so much harder working than me physically. She's also a fitness instructor like yourself, but she does so many classes throughout the week, always moving. And if you look at her body composition, you would think she's overweight. And from my perspective, she's very fit. She's very fit because she doesn't stop moving. And so how can you tell me that that's an unhealthy person? And she watches her diet, because I was watching her diet. It was a very healthy diet. And so there has to be context. And I just feel like there has been a pendulum swing too far in some directions. But as long as people are taking into consideration what we see health as, it has to be within context, right? It has to be within even what I really heard another guest say is, what is the healthiest version you look like? That's what you should be trying to do. And it doesn't have to be skinny. It just has to be a way of life that you want to live, right? And to have some permission for yourself to be like, hey, a body composition could be very different and still be very happy with it. So I'm glad you really raised that point. With that being said, I'd love to kind of touch on where you're going from here. Like, this is a Strong Ambition podcast. So why don't you tell everyone, what's your most recent ambition? What's coming down the pipeline that you're really excited about?
I think right now I'm just excited to get back into my training schedule. Personally, I know that I've lost some strength. So I think a lot of that is just getting into that routine. That's probably for my personal goals when it comes to fitness, is just getting back into where I was and then keep going for that. I mean, I have a lot of specific goals in there with deadlifting. Deadlifting is my favorite.
Yeah.
lift. Like from having never lifted a weight, like I love to deadlift. Would love to hit like a 2x body weight at some point that's far, far in the future. But I come up with new goals every time I'm in the gym, because I'm just excited to get better in the gym always.
Yeah.
I think that probably the biggest thing personally, professionally, I'm, trying to build my business too along the way. So I'm in a big growth mode there outside of my fitness. So
the deadlift, again, I'll say, like, we got to one day figure this out, that there should be some sort of a health fitness correlation with what you can deadlift. And if you can deadlift so much, we know that you're going to live a long time. I think that's been probably one of the coolest things to see in the gym, which both good and bad when you go into public gyms now is like, wow, way more people are deadlifting. They're dog shit deadlifts and it looks like dogs sticking to shit, but it's like, hey, people care about lifting weights now, and that's been a cool evolution. So I love hearing that. Well, I love that you were having this conversation with me today. I think we got into some really great topics. I think it's been really helpful information. So why don't you tell more people about where they can find your information and more about your program?
Yeah, awesome. So you can find me on social media at Callie Jane Fitness. It's CALLIEJANE Fitness. That's pretty much all across the board social media, but mostly on Instagram. I am taking in-person and online clients. In person, if you're local to San Diego, hit me up on there. That's probably the best way to find me.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Callie, for coming on here. Really appreciate the conversation, and we'll have to have you on again in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much to Callie for that conversation. I really loved all the different topics that we hit on there. She had some great insight when it came to tips around the fat loss journey. And I thought it was great that she just focused on the mindset. Like, it's the mindset. Like, it's really about mental health. And she had some amazing pieces. One of the ones I really appreciated the most was, if you're not happy getting there, it's not really worth it. It can't be healthy. And especially when she said, if you try to only be small, you're going to feel small, not in a good way. And I thought that was so well put. And it's super valuable for people to appreciate that if you're going after some sort of fat loss journey, and it's just for the sake of being skinny, it's not to feel better, you're only looking at the aesthetics of it, and you currently don't value yourself enough, this is not going to be a way to live. You're not going to want to enjoy this process, and you're not going to love yourself. And that's super detrimental for long-term health and sustainability. And so it's a great way to simply summarize it. If you're going to only try to be small, you're going to think small, you're going to feel small. And it's super helpful to hear her perspective on the HAES movement. I think it's a very important topic that we need to talk about more. We need to understand that there's a spectrum of health and fitness. And to hear her talk about her uncle that literally, well, many relatives that unfortunately passed away, but then to hear that there were all different cases is very fascinating. And then to hear an uncle that was arguably fit, but then had an issue. So it's super, super helpful to hear these different perspectives from people. And I think it's very much something I agree with, that as long as you have some realm of fitness, some physical capacity, I think people can be healthy at any size. And I'll always say, very similar to what she had said, that you can be happy at any size, and happiness is really what the life is about. So to each their own. And so I really appreciate her perspective, and I think she's got some wonderful ones when it comes around training, fitness, and nutrition. I've checked out her Instagram. She really understands her stuff very well. So I highly recommend you go check out her Instagram page, as she's got a lot of very valuable and entertaining stuff for you to appreciate. And so thank you so much for listening. It's always my pleasure to help you. Please leave a review if you can, to help this little podcast grow slowly but steadily. But regardless, I appreciate you as a listener. I always do. Thank you for spending your time listening to me and my guests. Try to help you on your own journey in any way that I can, because life is not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.